yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Welcome to Against the Grain, where curiosity leads the way.
Hi Karen, thanks very much for joining me.
Hi Gary, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good, thanks. It's good to see you.
You too.
We're having a summer finally.
Yeah. I just
How
hope
do you
it's
feel
not
about
all
that?
over. I really do like the warm weather, but I don't like it when it gets really, really hot. So sort of when it starts pushing 30 degrees, then my body starts to go. But at the moment it's fine. A little bit cooler today, which is good.
Yeah, I think it'll be probably another 3 or 4 days before we start seeing the newspapers telling us we're all going to die and people will be complaining off the roof, you know. And, it's not long. Right, let's get down to it. Well, it's great to have a guest on, you know, that we can just chat about crop circles. Because I've had a bunch of guests talking about different subjects so far, including some crop circle stuff. But, you know, you and I are kind of hardcore crop circle people.
Yep.
So I thought, you know, let's dive in. So the first question is, how did you get into it all?
Well, I had a fascination with all things mysterious when I was a child. I really loved anything to do with ancient Egypt, which I think I got from my mother. And there was a book in the house, I think, about the Tutankhamun find, and there were pictures in that which just fascinated me. And then when I got a little bit older, I remember watching Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World on the TV, which was fascinating. I loved a lot of the films. I loved Close Encounters. It's still one of my all-time favorite movies. So yeah, I loved everything like that really when I was a kid. So I really got into this probably when I was in my maybe late teens. I think the first book I ever read about UFOs, funnily enough, was Communion by Whitley Strieber, which is still one of my go-to books. And I often find myself reading it around Christmas time because that's sort of when he first remembers something happening to him. So whenever I kind of feel like I'm losing connection with any of this, that's my go-to book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why do you think you sometimes feel like you're losing connection? That's an interesting thing you just brought up at the end there.
I just think because life is so busy and there are so many things that it's just easy to become distracted. And also I feel sometimes for me, it's a particular mindset that I like to be in. So when when we're coming into a season or I'm drawing up crop circles or I'm writing about them, I have a frame of mind that I like to be in where I'm kind of, I don't know, just I feel I'm connected to something. And so that book always takes me back there. It was like almost it was the book that opened the door, if you like, to it. It's something, and I also think it's a magical book. I think it's incredibly well written, and as Professor Jeffrey Kripal would say, I know you're a fan.
I'm a big fan.
Would say that it is one of those books that just has a magical effect on the psyche, and it really draws you in. And I just find myself connecting. It doesn't take long.
I haven't read Communion. I obviously saw the film years ago, but I've read Jeffrey Kripal's book with Whitley Strieber where they have that kind of dialogue, which I found was amazing.
It was a good book.
Yeah, really good. Well, I was going to talk about books later, but now you've brought it up. Let's dive into that. You know, we talked before about, and I actually got a copy today of this.
Yeah, Veronica Goodchild's book.
Yeah, so I'm really keen to dive in. Books on crop circles or books on these subjects. You just mentioned Communion, and we got that one. What other books have you found that have been really inspiring to you along the way with this subject?
I guess I guess one of the first ones that I really loved was Alec Bartholomew's book, Crop Circles, Harbingers of World Change,
Okay.
which again I just thought connected really wonderfully, I think, with how a lot of people were feeling at the time, that somehow there was something portentous about the crop circle subject, and that they did herald some kind of change, whether at the time, I believe in the early 90s, we were talking about the ascension process and all of that. Or now we might say, a change in human, or an evolution in human consciousness. So it's the same kind of thing, really, to me. So that was one of the early ones. I loved Patrick Harper's books. Demonic Reality.
Demonic, yeah.
Was pretty good book. I also, another one of my really big favorite books is his book Mercurius, which is a novel that he wrote about kind of a novel about the alchemical process. So I love that. That's another one of my go-to books as well. And of course, then books like Michael Glickman's book, and whether it was the Little Crop Circle book, which I still think is really great, or whether it was his Bones of God opus.
His magnus opus, yeah.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed that one too. There have been actually quite a few that I've really got something out of. It's very rare that I read a book about crop circles and not get something from it, just because it's so interesting to read other people's points of view on it, and to look at how your view might have changed over the years, or how it compares. So yeah, that not many books and Veronica's book is great because it talks about the whole gamut of engaging the whole of the psyche with the phenomenon. So she talks a lot about dreams and about synchronicity from a Jungian perspective. And I retold one of my dreams for her for the book, which you'll read about when you read it. But
okay, I look forward to that.
Yeah. There've been lots of books. I love Crooked Solely, Alan Brown's book with John Michel. John Michel's little book about the face and the message is also another one, that I just think, that was a really great book. And again, I mean, John Michel's such a great writer, but yeah, so that was so nicely done, that one. Yeah. Other books, Andy Thomas's book, Vital Signs, was a really good book that gave a really good sort of history of the phenomenon. And then Terry Wilson's book, The Secret History of Crop Circles.
History.
Is brilliant, So
I wrote a documentary. I wrote 16 episodes for Gaia TV when I was living in Mexico, and one of them was on the history of crop circles, and that book was just the go-to book. And I spoke to Terry excuse me, I spoke to Terry at the time and said, look, I'm going to be referring to this a year, and he said, yeah, go ahead, just put what you like. I've got to get him on. I've never seen it. I'm going to get him on the show, because I mean, he just did great research on that, didn't he, and showed that this 1979 start date of the crop circles is just wrong, isn't it? There's just been so much of it about for a long time, really. But so I mean, when we're looking at Veronica Goodchild's book, and I mentioned this other book to you recently, which I think you should get a copy of, because I think it's going to be right up your street. It's Gary Brodbell's book. And I've spoken to Gary. He's going to come on the show shortly. It's deep and it's dense, and it's going to take several readings, really, because it's one of those books, like I remember when I was at university, I used to read a paragraph and go, okay, I read all those words, but they didn't go in. I need to read them again. And then you read them, and then all of a sudden you get that, okay. Do you know what I mean? It's like almost like something has to shift inside you to absorb the words and get the meaning of. And it's one of those, and he's obviously put so much work into. And it brings us to this Jungian aspect of the whole of us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And one of the things with the crop circles, which I think you and I both agree is kind of frustrating, really, is that sort of debates about bent nodes, and it's relevant, and it's relevant to the people that are there dealing with that, of course, and that's to respect everybody's stages as they work through this process, But when you sort of get interested into this other stuff, and it's talking about us, it's talking about humanity, how do you, so connecting that with the geometry and the geometry that you've done along the way, and geometry, these mandalas being an image of wholeness.
Yeah.
How can I phrase this question? How do you see that as a way? I mean, you do your workshops and they're great, and Jeff's so great, you know, with the way that he puts these things across. It's service, isn't it? What you're offering is a service. You've absorbed something from this phenomenon, and now you've realised what it's done to make you see a part of yourself that you would have never seen.
Yeah.
And now you're giving it back.
Yeah.
Aren't you?
Yeah, because that's kind of what you do, isn't it? I mean, yeah, I mean, the thing about drawing geometry, and I'm sure you must find this in the times that you've done it, is that it is a whole of being process. People don't get that. Like, you know, there's a physicality to it, there is a mentation to it. There's also a deeply intuitive side as well, that when you're looking at something, you're thinking, oh, I wonder if, or, you know, so you are engaging all of it. You're also engaging everything that you've learned from all the other drawings that you've done over the years as well. So it's a whole of person process, and it changes you, because, you know, it's like so many things. Once you've seen something, you can't unsee it.
Absolutely.
So, you know, once you've seen a certain way in which a geometry operates, you don't forget it, because it's just a moment of revelation when it comes. So yeah, I think, you know, it's a deeply spiritual thing as well. I think drawing geometry is deeply spiritual as well. So yeah, to me, it's all interconnected, and because those are the deepest learnings that you have from being involved in something like this, those are the things that you want to try and enable or facilitate other people to be able to do for themselves, and so that's why I do what I do the way that I do it. You know, in the hope that and people do get it. You know, I mean, I'm always, you know, very humbled and amazed and, you know, pleased when people get it, and they begin. You can see the lights are going on, and, you know, and they realize then why it is that you do the things the way that you do, but also they get your perspective as well. That they start to see it from your perspective, so which then becomes their perspective, of course. But
of course.
So yeah, it's you know, I mean, even when you're drawing geometry, there's a rhythm to it. You know, your hands are moving, your body moves, even though you don't realize that it is, but you do. And you know, you're looking around at different ways of looking or whatever at something. So it's a whole of body, whole of being thing that you do. Yeah.
And that whole of body, whole of being, would when you said earlier it's spiritual, one of the things along the way for me is when I've said to people, you know, geometry is spiritual, you see their eyes sort of what you know. Yeah. Geometry, I mean, we did this stuff at school, we drew triangles and we had to work out. Is that it? Is that it for you, that this thing, that because it's engaging the whole of us, that's what makes it spiritual, or is there more to it than that?
No, I think it is a big part of it. I think also it's spiritual because it deals with matters that go beyond the psyche even eventually. So you start to talk about matters of the heart, or matters to do with the essence of who we are. All those things are addressed. I think once people begin to understand that numbers can have meaning, as well as being quantities, i.e. they have, you know, qualities as well as quantities, I think then, you know, that's when people begin to realize that actually there is an innate meaning in everything. You know, if only we knew how to to find it or to see it, because it's very often it's a matter of learning to see it, as you know, and
Yes.
once you've learnt to see it, you can't unsee it, and it just becomes part and parcel of your paradigm, becomes part and parcel of your world. So and in that sense it changes human consciousness. So every person that gets to understand the sacred geometry on some level has their consciousness changed. And of course, sometimes people don't even need to learn the geometry. Sometimes just looking at something, I think sometimes, especially crop circles, I think have a way of bypassing the rational mind and speaking directly to the unconscious or the heart or the spirit. And they don't require explanation sometimes, but when you do get the explanation, it then becomes a much deeper experience. So I think the crop circles are doing their thing despite everything that we do. Just by people looking at them, I think they do work on you. But if you engage back with that, then the rewards are so much more than not. But I do think that they get people looking, at the world differently. I mean, for a start, they're looking at something that shouldn't be there,
Right.
and yet is a mystery. And so that begins to open doors already. And of
Yeah.
course, some people will go a little bit further down the path, and maybe they'll close the door and think, "Oh, that's not for me, thank you," or whatever. But then people like you and me, galloping along across the meadow or whatever, I mean, where's all this going to take us? So it's,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do think it's a whole of being thing, and it isn't for everybody, is it?
Well, no.
It isn't,
And that used to bother me. I mean, I remember, I'll share a personal thing with you. I in 1998, 1997, my first year involved in the crop circles was completely tumultuous, and you're running along headlong in the meadow like you described, like wondering where it's all going to lead. But I didn't really care. I just knew I had to go, but it was like this whole side of me going, this is crazy. And the other side of me going, but you've got to go. And it's, I'm sure you can relate. And then in 1998, the winter of 97, when it all died away, and I had this winter of 97 into 98, I questioned my sanity so deeply, that it wasn't good for me, really. And by February or March, I was in a mess, really. And my friend who brought me to the crop circles came back from America, and I think he came back in like late February, early March, and sort of, he was a very wise guy, the guy who took me to the crop circles, and he lifted me up and sort of, like, get yourself together, and the season's going to start soon. And it did in April, and then we were off again. And then the solstice came, and there was this pentagram at Avebury Truslow. Do you remember the one with the sort of scalloped edges?
Yeah.
And it had a little, this little circle in the centre. It was a lovely pentagram, and it had these scalloped edges around the circumference of it.
Yeah.
And I tried to sort of talk to people and family and friends and that over the winter time, and sort of been rejected. And there was this whole turmoil that you go through with that. And I remember standing in that crop circle, and it was after the solstice, and it was absolutely buzzing as far as I could tell with. And I was watching the cars drive past along the road, and just at that moment it came to me that, here I am standing in this miracle, and everybody's driving past, and it really made me cry. It's like, oh my God, like, people are really missing something that's absolutely magical, and not only are they missing it, they're really like forcefully turning away from it.
Yeah.
So it really, really upset me.
Yeah,
in the early
I can
days.
imagine. Yeah.
But then you have, that's the journey, isn't it? You got to go through that and then realise, okay, so this is not about being a Manic Street Preacher and going, you've got to believe it, it's going to save us all, because you go mad.
You do. It is the fastest way to madness lies there. Yeah.
It really, really does. It really does. Yeah. Because there's the whole messianic complex of like, I've got a mission and all that sort of stuff. It's just not good for you, is it? And so don't go there. Well, you just said the crop circles, you don't have to know the geometry, it does it to you. What you made me think of then was music. because there's this whole, as you know, correlation between, you know, the 7 liberal arts and geometry and music, and this number in time and number in space. And so I often give the example when I sort of bring this subject up in conversation with people about geometry and music, about number and time and number and space, and say about the octave, and that we don't have to be musically trained to recognize an octave. It does it to us. It bypasses the intellect, and we know it's the same sound, but it's a pitch higher or a pitch lower when we hear that interval, that octave, which is a numerical whole number. And similarly, you know, as you know, when you look at a piece of geometry that's got the same whole number ratios, it's doing it to you without you really knowing. Yeah. And when I first got involved, I began to study African music, as you know, and I went off to Africa, and the music there. Some years before, I'd tried to learn the dots with keyboard. Right, so I went to keyboard lessons, and the guy was I was sort of touching the keyboard a bit, but mostly it was all about all these dots. And you know, I did grade 1 and 2 and 3 and passed all the tests. I got really good at drawing all the little, you know, semi-quavers and crotchets and all the rest of it, right? But I was crap at playing the keyboard, right? Because I was spending so much time on the theory. And then when I studied African music, they go, like my son now plays a 21-string harp, the kora, and you don't have to learn any musical notes. You just pluck this one, followed by that one, followed by that one, and then later, when somebody says that's an A sharp, that's an A minor, that's a B flat, you just know it. Yeah, it's there. And so in the West, we seem to have these things turned around, don't we? We've gone the same with geometry. It's all about the heavy, you know, stuff that turns people away from it, and this stuff turns people into it. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I hated maths at school, and I hated maths because I think it is an abstract. And I mean, that really turns some people on. They like the idea of an abstract, of something that has that level of cogent logic in it. And don't get me wrong, I could probably do it for a while. You know, I'd get some kind of intellectual satisfaction out of it, but not to love it as a subject. And we do. I mean, you know, what is taught at school, it is a complete abstract. And the geometry that you're taught in school is not the geometry that we know. So, and I think it is sad, because actually I think it would be a way in for people who find that kind of abstraction very difficult, for them to realise that actually there's a number here, or a rhythm, or a shape. You know, I mean, I remember going back to maybe 97 was when I first came across reading about that link between music and shape, so that you know, geometry is like frozen music.
Yeah, Goethe's quote.
That's right. And I think I actually read about it in John Anthony West's book, The Serpent in the Sky, where he does the book is kind of like a modern retelling of the work of Schwaller de Lubitz, who did all his work in ancient Egypt. So we're going back to the beginning again. So, but yeah, and that was where I first read about cymatics and the work of Hans Jenny and all of that. And I remember actually writing a really short article about it. I can't remember what it was called now, something like Shape, Vibration in Egyptian Temples, or something like that it was. But it was this, you know, again, another door unlocks, and you walk through it, and suddenly there is something again where you realize that geometry isn't a man-made thing. It is that we just discovered it. We didn't sort of invent it. We just found it. You know, and again, as you say, I think it does help explain, you know, why the crop circles have such a profound impact on a lot of people. And I don't know if you've noticed this over the years, but a lot of people that are actually drawn to the crop circles are either musicians or artists, or, you know, have had some kind of connection with the arts in that way, because they get it just on a, you know, on an inner level. They don't
Yeah.
sort of need the explanation. They
Yeah.
just get it. You know, the explanation's the icing on the cake.
I interviewed Carly, the yogi
Oh, yeah.
podcast, and she said when I first heard about crop circles, I just went, well, of course. It's the way she said it was just, well, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah.
She spent a lot of time in India and the Vastu Shastra kind of tradition, and knowing that there's these things are kind of all there. She just sort of knew really that this is, and she and her organisation's called Tri Yoga. Mostly it was channeled, and she's now teaching in like 45 countries
Wow.
around the world, and her system has helped so many people, and it's another example of something coming to you. It's funny, I was watching a podcast, I finished watching it this evening, with Wim Hof. Have you come across him?
No.
They call him the Iceman. Okay. I just picked up his book too. Here he is.
Okay.
The Wim Hof method. Okay. This guy, he's had an extraordinary life, an absolutely extraordinary life. And he decided, standing by an icy river once, from intuition, that he needed to jump in the water.
Wow.
And he did. And from that, and not dying from it, he discovered that there is a certain amount of stress that we can take, hormetic stress, which is actually really, really good for us.
Yeah.
And he developed this system of breathing and mind work, meditation, combined with going in the ice bath, which is now worldwide. It's an international bestseller. Okay. And doctors and scientists studied him because he managed to climb Kilimanjaro in 31 hours, and he's sat in ice baths, and they've measured the temperature of his skin and the people that he teaches this system to, and it doesn't go down. The skin doesn't go down.
That's amazing.
There's so many papers now of scientists that have engaged it, and the reason I bring this up is because initially, of course, everybody said, well, this is madness, just like the crop circles, right? You can't be jumping in the ice, it will kill you.
Yeah.
And now scientists have got involved and actually studying it. They're really, really intrigued, because what it's doing to the immune system of people, and curing all sorts of illnesses just from going in. He says going in deep inside yourself. Going in the ice makes you face yourself.
Yeah.
And when I heard him say that, it just brought me to the crop circles, of course, because that's in a slower way, in some respects, than jumping in a bath of ice. It makes you it makes you confront yourself, right?
Yeah, it does.
And so what I thought of when I watched this was, there seems to be a number of ways right now, unorthodox ways, and we'll come on to the UAPs and UFO subjects in a moment, but a number of ways which are completely changing the paradigm of the way we think, aren't they?
Yeah.
Jumping in a bath of ice, who would have thought it? UFOs, who would have thought it? Crop circles, who would have thought it? We're not there yet with the crop circles. It still seems that people are still a little bit standoffish compared to the UFOs, because it's become mainstream with the New York Times and David Grush and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
What's your take on where we are with the UAP UFO situation right now?
I think it's interesting. I think for me, what's interesting is that I think for a very long time, the powers that be, she said, whoever they might be, these magical people, have managed to keep a lid on whatever it is that's known about this for a very long time, very successfully. And it doesn't matter how many sightings there have been or how many people talk about what they've seen. I mean, I know you're a fan of Richard Dolan.
Yes.
And I was listening to him a little while ago, and he was saying this sheer amount of UFOs that are reported every year runs, in America, I think it runs into the tens, if not hundreds of thousands every year. and which is astonishing. And
Yeah.
when you think, when there are so many people, I know some of those would be misidentifications, but personally, I don't think it's anywhere near as many as people would have you believe. I don't think it's like 90% odd. I really don't.
No.
Most people are not stupid. They're actually quite smart, and some of them are so crystal clear that you it's not like a fuzzy little dot in the sky. You just think it's blindingly obvious to anybody who actually wants to see this that there's something really odd going on, and has been going on for a very long time.
Yes.
But still, I think they've been able to dampen it down, but using ridicule, using denial, all those propaganda tools which they're very good at using. I think what's changed now is that I think there are some people on the inside of this, people who have worked in the intelligence community or in the Department of Defense or the military, who are actually UFO experiencers. And I think they are really fed up with the situation. I think they're fed up of having to lie about it, especially if they're having experiences themselves, which some of them are. I think there is now a growing feeling that whatever is going on, the intelligence community and the Department of Defense and the military are not the best people to be addressing this anymore. And
Track record's not good, is it?
No, it's not. And actually, we need to get more mainstream scientists involved, and we need to be talking to people who experience these things. So, and we need to be learning about it, because despite what the British government would say, which is that UFOs do not pose any national security threat, I think it's absolutely rubbish. If there's something out there and you don't know what it is, what its intent is, or any of that stuff, then that's a threat to national security, however you want to look at it. But I actually think that the push now is because there are people on the inside who have seen things, who have had experiences, and they don't think it's appropriate for this to be kept a secret anymore. I think there are lots of games being played. There always are, and it's very, very hard to know, who is who, what is what. It's very difficult. So while I'm very interested in it, which I am, I also kind of keep a little bit of a distance, because it's very easy to get sucked into everything that's been said, and at the end of the day, we don't really know as yet what is right and what is wrong in this. So yeah, I think that's the change, and I think that's an interesting change, that I think is actually being led by experiencers rather than who are saying, no, enough is enough now. And this isn't going to end well if we don't do something to change it.
I agree with you, and I'm the same with I'm interested, but I try and keep a distance. Because I'm running this podcast and I'm interviewing people who are involved in the subject, I of course have to dive into it to research, what's going on and who's saying what, and wading through some of that stuff, you just like, oh my God, you got to keep a certain kind of head, haven't you? Because it's funny, isn't it? We talk to people who are skeptical that this stuff's going on, but I'm skeptical about the way it's being released. And when I interviewed Steve Bassett recently, I brought up a couple of subjects that confuse me about this disclosure, right? That why all of a sudden, I said to him, so the New York Times article in 2017 was controlled, right? It was staged. He went, no, it wasn't staged. It wasn't controlled. So I was like, what? So all the people that have gone to the press in the past for the last 70 odd years who've been rubbished or editorialized or, flat done it. What made the difference? How did it get released now? Someone must have flagged it to the intelligence services, as has happened over the years. And the intelligence services said, yeah, all right, go ahead. Or Gary Nolan, when he went on Tucker Carlson, right? If the CIA approached him in 2014 and said, we want you to investigate these people that have had these experiences and, physiologically test them to see what's happened. And he's sitting on Tucker Carlson's show and saying, yeah, I found their brains had been affected and they had this happen to them and so on and so forth. He didn't just go and do that without the CIA's approval. No way. He couldn't have, could he?
I don't, I really, it's one of those questions, isn't it, that I don't really know the answer to.
Well,
I mean,
no.
on one level, you would think not, if you believe that they have that much control. But I guess on the other hand, I think from the amount of pushback people have had, particularly people like Lou Elizondo in the 2017 New York Times article, has had so much pushback. I think perhaps he did catch them on the hop. I don't think they thought he would do that. I think they thought.
I'm inclined to believe that. Yeah.
But on the other hand, I do think, to some extent, they must be okay with all of this, because otherwise they'd push a lot harder to shut them down. So yeah, I just don't know. It as you say, well, as I said, I think actually that there are just so many games being played sometimes, and that it's very difficult to know who is playing for what, and it's so hard. So it is.
I mean, Steve's take was, look, they've lied to us for so long, so that there's politics going on, obviously, and they can't just come out and say, look, we've been lying to you for all these years. They've got to do it in a staged way. So he said, and it kind of made sense in a weird way. He said they're lying to us to reveal the truth later down the line, having lied to us for all these years. And I'm like,
no,
no, it's just.
These people are clever, but they're not that clever. Do you know what I mean? It just gets too complicated that way. It really does. I would imagine, I don't know, with Gary Nolan, that he didn't sign anything. He wasn't read into anything. So really, he could perhaps say what he liked. But I know, I'm sure you've heard him say that he was told, be careful what you say. But I don't know. I think we're in the really early stages of this, because I think this is going to go on for a lot longer yet, and it will be a very, very, if all this does come out at the end of the day, it's going to be a very long time before we find out what really happened, what the real story was.
I think you're right. I mean today's or I think it was in the last couple of days that the Nazca mummies has taken a turn in the story.
I read about that. Yeah.
I knew, obviously, having worked for Jaime and been in Mexico, that these small figures were the ones that were of attention. The big one, Maria, and that they found that they just weren't what they thought they were. But the little ones, which surprised me. But somebody said something about an MD or something, said that the blood, the veins or something that's inside the ligatures or the ligaments or something between the joints, is what's convincing them that there's more to this, because you couldn't just put that together with fish bones and create all of that stuff. And so there's still more questions. And as Gary Nolan pointed out in an interview with the Anomalous Unidentified podcast the other day, he said, just because 70% of the DNA isn't identifiable, it doesn't mean we leap to the extraterrestrial answer.
No.
It could just be that it's degraded to a large extent and that we can't identify it because of that. So we need to have that voice of reason. I'm really glad that those kinds of quality scientists are along for the ride right now. So despite the fact that 7 years has gone by since the first New York Times article, and we haven't really seen that much, have we, apart from all of this, I'm still glad that, it's brought an air of authenticity to the subject where we can actually talk about it now and speculate and like Gary Nolan said in the interview, he said, look, when we were at university, you used to have a drink or maybe smoke something illicit and have wild conversations and speculate. This is good for us to do, right? And so that's back on the table, which I'm quite pleased about.
Yeah, and it could be at the end of the day that they turn out to be some unknown human hominid. It's perfectly possible.
Yeah.
But, it's like our good friend Professor Kreipel says, everything has to stay on the table until it's not on the table.
Love that saying.
Yeah, me too. And because it's so easy, to to go off at a juncture, or to write something off, or as my mother would say, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
The bathwater, yeah.
We mustn't, you have to resist doing that. I think that's very true for the crop circles as well. When you listen to all people's conversations about them, or experiences in and around them or with them, you realize that actually there is something extraordinary going on. And, that's why everything has to stay on the table at the moment, I think. Yeah.
I spent a week in South Africa with the great John Martineau back in 2014. We stayed up till 4 a.m. at least every night drinking single malt whiskey, and I never drank single malt whiskey before. It was a great experience, and had the most cosmic conversations. And whenever I meet someone who I consider to be, on another level of smartness, I like to say to them, what's the one thing that what's the one thing that you would say to somebody is the biggest thing you've learned And he said, as an editor, you never dismiss anything. If somebody comes to you with a comment that you think off the cuff is just, and you're going to throw it off the table, don't. You have to really consider it and really keep it on the table until it's time to get it off. And he said the same thing as Kripal in that sense, Yeah. So true, isn't it?
It is. It really is true. Because the other thing is that, we forget, don't we, that we have our own personal agendas, we have our own personal biases, and it's so easy to give in to them. And that's why it's it's like when people say to me, what do you think about crop circles and everything? And my first response is, well, what do you think about them? I mean, because, in a sense, what they think is every bit as valid as what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, apart from the fact I suppose I would qualify what you just said in terms of like what Gary Nolan said recently in this interview, when he speaks to somebody who's not got any data or experience in the subject. Then he says to them, well, how much data have you got, and what experience have you got?
Yeah.
Okay, well, go off and read this and do this and do that, and then come back and let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
It's a way of beating off the kind of rejection and critics, I suppose, that he's come across. And so, I suppose I've a little bit facetiously said to people over the years, it's not fair fight really, because I've got 1,000 crop circles under my belt and you haven't got any. So, go away and spend a bit of time with some crop circles, come back and we'll have a conversation.
Yeah.
But I guess a little bit that's out of frustration really. But
yeah, and I think you and I have said this before. It's like, how do you impart 30 years of wisdom into 20 minutes? Because you just can't do it. Where do you even begin? Yeah. I find I've learned. I think I've learned a little bit more. This is where you get to challenge your own shadow side with all of this, isn't it? Where people go to me, so what does it all mean then? And like as if you're going to give it to them in one sentence. You're like, oh, okay. And breathe. Yep.
Got to find my Zen moment there.
Yeah.
When I first, I think I said this to you a number of times, Karen, but my first introduction to you as a researcher was that little conference you held in Alton Barnes in Coronation Hall those years ago with Alan Brown and Nick Colostrum and the late great Michael Glickman.
Yeah.
And that's when you introduced me to your cards on the table kind of subject. And so you worked as a psychotherapist, and so you had that kind of insight into what it means to sit down with somebody and help them bring their psyche to the table so that you could help them. I think, tell me if I'm wrong with how you said this, because it stuck with me all these years. You said you can't help someone move forward until you put their cards on the table to show where they've been, where they are now, so that they can make informed decisions about which direction they're going to take in the future.
Sounds pretty accurate, that. Yep.
It's just so good.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's like any therapist will tell you, you don't help people per se, you help them to help themselves. That's how it works. Because it's like I was explaining to somebody just recently, you can sit down with a client and you can have a conversation with them for 30 minutes. and you can start to get ideas from what they're telling you, what might be going on. But if I might even have a good idea at that point what might be going on. But if you then sat down to them and said, well, here's what I think is going on. I think, this relationship with so and so has sown the seeds for so and so, and da 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 da, and give them all the theory, and they'll go, oh, thanks very much. And then what do they do?
Go back to it.
Yeah. So people have to feel the change inside. If they're unmoved inside, all they will do is go back to repeating all the things that got them in the chair in the first place. So it is about helping other people help themselves. And so I suppose a little bit of what I do with the crop circles is that I just help people see them in a different way. And then what they do with that is then up to them. Where they take it is then their journey onwards, So and I think that's the way it works best. I think that's the way the crop circles teach. I think it mirrors in some way the way the crop circles operate as well,
So if you've had somebody at one of your geometry workshops and you've helped them to sort of discover something about the crop circles, which is at the same time help them discover something about themselves, how do you help them with that? Okay, have you got an example of somebody that's...
I won't give an example because it might be betraying a confidence.
Sure.
But I think it happens because they just suddenly see something that they'd not been able to see before, and it is like a light bulb going on, because when you say, for instance, you begin to realize, like say we're doing fivefold geometry or something, we're drawing fivefold geometry, and we start talking about the way in which fivefold geometry operates in the world, all the different places that you can find it in the natural world, for instance. Or we start talking about John Martineau's The Dance of Venus, around the... And then you see people, just the light goes on, and that they're seeing the world in a different way, that they've unlocked a door, or they've unlocked another layer of reality, if you like. And you can see that once they've seen it, it will not change everything, but it does change everything. It's like one of those things, isn't it, where you think, well, it's such an innocuous thing in of itself, but you don't go back to seeing the world the other way. So when you realize, that geometry is the thing that gives form to all matter, and that it is essentially a small amount of numbers that do all of this, it's an amazing thing. And also then when they realize, something about themselves, whether it's, we can look at the vesica, for instance, which is the two circles, and it's about the division of unity, but it's about that two-ness in many things, but also in us. So whether that's the left or right hemisphere of the brain, whether it's, all those dualities, whether it's the conscious and the unconscious, the physical and the non, there are a whole list of them, aren't there? So, or even the male and the female inherently in all of us. So,
yes.
And they suddenly begin to see that these patterns are repeated over and over in absolutely everything. So not just in the crop circles, but it then when they begin to draw it as well, then the possibilities become even more. So, for instance, when we're drawing a formation on one of our workshops, we'll go back to the fivefold geometry. We'll start with, how do we divide a circle into five? How does that happen with a compass and a straight edge? We look at the five shapes, so we look at the pentagram and the pentagon. We would then look at where we might find those things in nature, and then we'd look at the pentagram particularly as relevant to the human being. The head, the two arms, the two legs. You stand, we're a pentagram. So, so all of those things, you know, and then of course from the pentagram you go on to Fibonacci and all of that. So it's how, you know, it's Michael's piece of cheese that goes on for ages. You know, there's no end to it. But you know, it's that. And then when people do draw them, one of the things that we encourage them to do is to actually make a mandala from them, so they can, you know, do whatever they want with them, color them, paint them, however they want to. They can add to them if because it's their process, and often in doing that, because Jeff has this wonderful kind of technique that he uses called his mandala nature process, where you're essentially you are drawing your mandala or crop circle in this case, but you do it in kind of a meditative state. So you might he has a music, we listen to music, you go and have a lie down, you'll think about it, you'll get up, you'll go and do a bit more work on it, you'll think, you know, and it's whatever comes to mind while you're doing that, because very often it's, you know, doing this kind of thing, really there's an opportunity for the psyche to open up and for you to kind of touch places that perhaps you haven't in a very long time. So it's a magical thing, really. You know, when you see people, or, you know, and they come back and they say, oh, that was so intense, and then I had this amazing dream, you know, and they sort of come back with all of this stuff. So it you know, it is like opening a door for people, really.
I mean, the Fibonacci sequence thing, when I first heard, I think it was John Martineau again, who said, you know, when we're born, we have 5 teeth in each quarter of our mouth, and they fall out and are replaced by 8 teeth, and the 5 and 8 are 13. And then when you look at a pineapple, and when you look at a fir cone, and then when you look at... So now, you know, we talk about being changed by it. I go walking every morning. One of my rituals in the morning is 5 a.m. I'm out in the park. I'm
going to interrupt you for 1 second. Remind me when you finish this. I'm going to tell you a good John Martineau story to do with 5, 8 and 13, but come back to this.
Okay. I can't go anywhere now without seeing this stuff. You know, it's all around us. If you're sitting in a garden and you just glance over at a flower, you count the petals, and you see that most of them are fivefold. You know, and there's a flower in Hawaii called the white zapote that's 7 petals. It's quite rare, but there's very few of them. You know, it's mostly fivefold, isn't it? And fivefold. Then when you discover that 5 is the number for life, and it's for the regeneration, and it works in geometry just as it works in us. And once you learn this stuff, like you said several times, you can't go back. Yeah. You can't go back. And that link between simple geometry, and it's the simplicity, like Alan Brown said. Do you remember when he discovered what he discovered with Crooked Solely, and was so astounded by it, he ran off to John Michel and said, "Look at this and just check me if I'm going mad." John said, "This is astounding," and they wrote that wonderful book, which is I think going to be, it's just the most amazing book. But he, in his interview with Terry Toffness, he said, when you take like, for example, the solutions to squaring the circle from the quintuplets, and he back engineered when Michael discovered that squared circle, and then Alan looked back over all the others, and he said, when you've got this puzzle that so many clever people have worked on but over the years, but have gone more and more into complexity, and you bring it back and you realise that this is so simple that children can understand it, then you have to consider that when somebody can take something that's really complicated and make it so simple that everybody can understand it, that's high intelligence.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And so all around us, these fivefold flowers, these Fibonacci sequences. I mean, the word Fibonacci makes it sound a bit, complicated, doesn't it? It's like
a bit highbrow.
If his name was John or Jones or Smith or something, if you remember the Smith numbers, it probably wouldn't frighten people off so much. Fibonacci's a bit scary in itself, but when you get it and you just go, this is really easy, and it's so simple that it's overlooked. What has that profundity done to you, Karen, with the simplicity of it all?
above all, actually, it gives me a great sense of ease. Do you know that grasping what life is, what it means, the universe, creation, all of those big questions, that that you can have the most complicated answers to it and know nothing. And whereas geometry, it kind of really hits you in the heart. It's like psychotherapy. It's when you learn something about yourself and you think, bloody hell,
Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing, really. It's that inner knowing, you don't have to have a degree in psychology to understand yourself.
No, exactly.
So, and I think it's the same with this. You don't need a degree in mathematics to understand geometry. Because geometry is basically, it's about ratio. It isn't even about measuring half the time. So you don't need any of that to do it. So yeah, I think it gives me a sense of great ease. That it's okay. You don't have to be the smartest person in the world to really get this. Yeah.
And it's like what you said earlier, when maths frightens everybody and kills everybody at school with the interest in it because it's abstract.
Yeah.
And Eric Weinstein recently said that the trouble with all of that is that string theory has led us down a path with physics for so long that it's absurd. It's nonsense. It's so abstract that only a few people really understand it and grasp it, and most of them argue with each other over who's got the right answer, and the rest of us just go like, we don't care. It's true, isn't it?
It is.
And so the mysteries of the universe are like, it's just a few guys who are arguing about it over there in the bowels of the university somewhere.
Yeah.
And then when you come up with like the stuff that the crop circles are bringing us with this simple way to go, all right, what you're seeing there with the way, the numbers of your teeth, or the dance of Venus, it's got exactly the same numbers, the way Venus moves around us in the sky. So those numbers are massively beating themselves out all around us with Venus's dance. And that everybody can get it.
Yeah. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Yeah. And I also think the other thing, it gives me a sense of great. The other thing is that the other thing it teaches you is that there is inherent meaning in all of this. That it means something. That because that's the other great scam, isn't it, about science, that it's all meaningless.
Meaningless.
Yeah, it's all coincidence. It's all meaningless. It's just this, that, and the other. And whereas looking at the world in this way, everything has meaning. The world is full of meaning, and that's one of the biggest lessons as well. That because it's. Can I swear on your podcast?
Please do.
It's fucking depressing, isn't it?
It really is.
When you sit and think about, what we are taught about the world and life, that none of it has any meaning whatsoever. Everything you do is worthless.
Yep. We're just little specks on a little rock that's spinning around in a distant corner of the galaxy. Yep. Yeah.
And so it doesn't surprise me. I think we've talked about this before, that I think there is an existential crisis in humanity, which I think, is going to be in some way changed by an acknowledgement of all this kind of stuff, that there is this layer of reality to which we have become blind, willfully blind, I think is the way I would put it. That we cut ourselves off from that. And while I can understand the attraction of, as I say, the logic of an abstraction, maths and physics, I can totally understand why people get into it. To me, there's also something slightly depressing about it.
Very depressing.
So I think, whatever little bit I can do to get people to realize that might not be the case is every time I do that, I feel I've done a good job.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, this is it, isn't it? We're all playing our little part in bringing back. When I was at university, I think I've told you this before. My landlord was he was a PhD, a sort of biochemist who postdoced at Berkeley and had this illustrious career. And then he came back to Cardiff and he got a first in psychology in 2 years.
Wow.
And ended his career as a sort of lecturer in psychology. And he was writing a book that he said he might never finish on the biological basis of consciousness. And so his view was life is an accident, random, patch on patch. DNA is just a patch on a patch and a mutation on a mutation. It's all happenstance, you know. Life is meaningless. Any notion of that there's meaning or that there's some sort of metaphysical side to reality is wishful thinking. And he was a great spy. I loved, actually, at first it was, keep away. But then you realise that you really need to debate with these people and discuss and find out how it is that they're coming up with the things that they're coming up with.
I actually think some of it, some of that negativity like that comes from things like entropy theory. Where because again, the theory of entropy is so nihilistic.
Yeah.
That everything eventually just grinds to a halt and dies. That is a depressing thought, isn't it? And I think once that gets into the psyche, and again, this idea that it doesn't matter what you do, that it ultimately means nothing. You can see why people get very depressed about this, but it's become part of our culture, that we're taught these things from being quite small now. I know you don't get taught the theory of entropy when you're 5 or 6, but by the time you're into your mid-teens, you most certainly are. And it is utterly depressing, especially for young people who are just starting out in their life and thinking, here I am, I've got this life, this wonderful opportunity, what am I going to do with it? And then all of a sudden they're taught this. And it seeps into, it creeps in, doesn't it? These kinds of ideas, they creep in, and they affect fundamentally who we are. And I think it's utterly depressing. Yeah. I mean,
it's without wishing to sound, it's just cynical. It serves abandonment really well, doesn't it? It allows people to go, well, I can get drunk and I can take all these drugs and I can party and there's no point in worrying about this or that or the other, because ultimately nothing means anything, right? Yeah. And so it's the antithesis of a life of awe and wonder, of magic that's all around us, of understanding that the miracles. I remember on 777, one of the things I said this to Peter Robbins in the interview I did with him recently. By the time 10 years had gone by, from 1997 to 2007, of 10 years of the crop circles and all of the stuff, and by that time I'd got to the point where I realised that the magic was around us in the flowers and the pineapples and the teeth and it was all there, right? Yep. And so I actually said to Paula, just before we found out that the crop circle was down in the field, I said, I don't care if there's a crop circle there. I really don't. I don't need it. And then it was there. Yeah. And I think there was a personal kind of, you know what I mean? Yeah. I think that had to happen before I could get that gift, as it were. Yeah, you do. I mean, sometimes you can hold on to something so tight that it becomes a barrier to anything else happening. Yeah, I mean, I've seen that many times, and it's hard, isn't it? I mean, I think as human beings, we don't like change very much. That's why many of us end up in psychotherapy, because we're not very good at handling change. And it's the same with this. It's very hard to let go. Once we find a place of comfort for ourselves and we think, okay, I'm all right now. I'm all right. We get very frightened. The next thing that happens is we don't think, oh, where are we going next? The next thing is I'm getting very frightened. I'm going to lose all this. Yeah. So it's, but again, it's that, to me, it's something in our fundamental psyche, and that has to do with the way in which we see the world, reality, whatever. And if we can change that somehow,
without going backwards, because
Yep.
that's no good either. Saying, "Oh, I want to go back and live as an ancient Egyptian." Well, no, you wouldn't really. But we have to find a way to go forward. But that, of course, involves risk. And of course, when we come up to big, huge changes in, say, in human consciousness, then everything just becomes very fraught and very frantic.
Yeah.
I look at what's happening in the world of religion, for instance, which, religion is something that really interests me.
Yeah.
But when you look at the way in which fundamentalism has grown in many religions, you begin to realize that actually what's happening here is that people are holding on to something very tight because they're frightened they're going to lose it. And actually, wouldn't it be better if we just let it go a little bit and see where all this went? So, it's and so much of all those nihilistic things are built into the way in which we interpret a lot of those religions as well, and are actually built into the foundation of some of them too, I dare say. But a change in human consciousness is going to be a very painful thing. It is. It's why going to therapy is painful. It's
It's a birthing process.
It is a birthing process, and and nothing is born without. What is it the alchemist used to say? Oh, I can't remember the saying now. There's no generation without. I don't know, I can't remember now, but it's essentially that nothing new can be born unless something dies first. It's that idea of, in order for something new, something
has to die.
Something has to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that really is like what you just said. So when you said about you can't go back. So as you progress in years, you look back at the things you did as a younger person. Even recently sometimes, and you go, what was I thinking? I need to go back there and not do that, but you can't.
No.
And we have to live with it, and we have to move forward. It's the only way.
But it's why you don't do it again, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
If you hold on to it, for what it is, the lesson that it is. If you let it go and you let it go too much, then you will repeat it.
Yeah.
You got to hold on to it in a way that doesn't hurt you, but serves as a reminder, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And the pain of failure, or the pain of getting something wrong, is the teacher. People don't realize that, if you live a perfect life where you never made a mistake, you never said anything wrong, you never did anything wrong, you would have learned nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Right.
Nothing about yourself, nothing about anything, really. You would be completely ignorant in your rightness.
And we need to give people permission to be wrong,
Yeah,
don't
we
we?
do, yeah.
It's another thing with this world, isn't it? It's like, not only is it meaningless, the only thing that seems to mean anything is blame for that little mistake you made yesterday or the last week or something like that, and that sticks with people.
It does, and very often that when we do that, actually it's because we're defending against our own pain. Of course it is. We're projecting out, and it's, because it's painful for us to hear it, takes us back to our own pain, our own mistakes.
I find myself these days, and I suppose it's the gift of all of this, really. Whenever I get angry with people, usually it's on the roads. As soon as I get behind the wheel of a car, I become this person with Tourette's. It's weird. And it's particularly at young, reckless drivers, and then I'll go, oh shit, I was like that.
Yeah.
And it's this thing like Jordan Peterson said a while ago, and I wrote an essay on it on my website about being cruel. It's a strange thing, but I got the inspiration from Jordan Peterson when he said the only way to really understand the evil is to understand that you could be that person, and how you could be that person, how you could be that person that's so wicked.
Yeah.
Because it's in all of us to be that way, and looking at sometimes how you think and how internal that anger or that frustration is, and what thoughts go through your mind is that shadow side of ourselves, and embracing that is this Jungian aspect, isn't it, of all what we've been talking about.
Yeah, and cruelty is very often born out of a need to defend oneself. Cruelty often is born out of trauma. That somebody has done something to us, and by somehow being cruel keeps us from being hurt again. It is. It's complicated stuff.
It is.
But yeah.
Okay, I'll let you go in a minute, but
Yep.
two things. We've got to talk about the late, great Michael Glickman.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
We miss him, don't we?
I miss him every day. I can't
too.
tell you. I have a little
know.
I have a little post-it note on my computer monitor, and it says WWMS, and it's what would Michael say? And you know, I do. I miss him all the time. I miss him because I miss him as a person. Because he was a huge spirit, a huge personality. When you've had somebody like that in your life for as long as we did, there's no filling a hole like that. There's just not. The world is not the same. And I also miss him because he was a great staunch defender of the crop circles as well. And I admired him for that, because it's something I'm not very good at myself, and also something I chose not to do, not to be an evangelist about this, but to try and take a different route. But I do miss him because he loved this subject so much. He lived and breathed it every single day. And you know, and I'm reminded of him constantly. I was drawing the new crop circle at Wilton Windmill this year, and I found this lovely, they call it a Rolo triangle, with the curved sides, the three curved sides.
Yes, we've had that before, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. It was his discovery in the crop circles. And
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah. And in fact, he loved it so much, he had it on his wall in his house.
Oh, God, I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
Oh.
And as soon as I drew it, I just thought, oh, that's Michael. You know, it's, you know, just to see it just reminds you. It's like him tapping you on the shoulder, isn't it, all the time? Say, hey.
I've felt that a few times, you know. It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, Michael, we miss you. Yeah, I mean, the interview, there's an interview, I've done, as you know, quite a few interviews with Michael, and I included it in the last sort of tribute I made to him, you know, in that film, where you saw this man, and his body was frail, but his spirit was large, wasn't it, inside
huge,
this frail body, and he expressed this sense of responsibility that he felt, this weight that he felt, that he needed people to really take this seriously. And I think we've said this to each other before, that it was a massive strength for him to have that and fight that fight, but at the same time it wasn't good for him. Not
always. No, I think I think sometimes it was not good for him. I mean, you know, there's a flip side to everything, isn't there, as you know? And you know, the flip side for that is that sometimes you just get too involved in something you really should step back from. It's very hard when you feel very passionately about something, isn't it? You know, when you feel you need to defend something, you know, because I mean, it wasn't just the crop circles he was defending, it was his own worldview, it was his own paradigm, you know, that he was defending that too. So, but yeah, boy, I do miss him. Yeah.
It was something that you just mentioned about religion. A thought came to me. Sam Harris, his book The End of Faith, he said that one of the reasons that people become fundamentalists is because religion's no longer a discussion around the dinner table. It's banned. And so when you ban subjects for discussion, the fundamentalists rise up, because only the people that are fundamentalists are able to go off and talk about it.
Yeah. And also I think in fundamentalism they become people of the book. It's like having a rule book. You know, and it isn't a living and breathing tradition, and a living, breathing presence of spirit anymore. It just becomes a rule book, and you have to obey the rules. It's very sad.
Or someone's interpretation of it.
Yeah, it's very sad, because, you know, the life of the spirit, like the life of the psyche, is can be a wonderful adventure if you're open to it. It really can. Yeah.
Finally then, Karen, the story with John.
Oh, yeah. So a few years ago now, John Martineau came and gave the keynote address at the summer lectures, and he gave a talk about this idea of a universal cosmic holographic thing that essentially kind of it's how the universe operates, why everything looks the way they do, how it all holds together, and that essentially, just like fractals or even a hologram, you know, that one piece contains the whole of the pattern of, you know, for the whole. So the piece and the whole, that relationship. And we've been chatting a little bit with some other people, and he'd been talking about that sequence of numbers, 3, 5, and 5, 8 and 13. That's it. The
5, 8, and 13.
5, 8, and 13.
Yeah.
So those are the most common Fibonacci numbers that we find in nature.
Yeah.
And I was saying cheerio to him because I had to go off and organise the dinner at the end of the conference. Anyway, right at the end, the caterer comes up to me and he gives me the bill for the catering, and it's £813.50.
What are the chances, eh?
I know. And so anyway, I had to show it to him because, of course, it made him laugh. But, you know, it's just, I mean, that kind of thing happens when people get together, doesn't it? And they start talking about all this stuff, and then all the synchronicities start happening. So it was just, I'll never forget it because it was just so funny.
It's like the universe, it's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
The synchronicities, it's almost like, my teacher once said to me, we always consider about what we're looking at with the world. We don't consider what might be looking back at us.
Yeah. Yeah. Particularly at the crop circles.
Exactly. Karen, thanks so much. It's been a great conversation.
It's my great pleasure.
Any workshops coming up that we can talk about that you're doing?
We're doing the conference online, as we have been doing for the last 5 years. That will take place in October, and people can find details. They can find the dates there on the website, the holder dates. Okay. And yeah, we will be having another Crop Circle Explorers later on this year. And again, I've yet to put the dates up for those. And also a new course I've been running with my dear friend Jonathan de Veerville. And where we've been looking at engaging the crop circle phenomenon, and all the different ways that people might find of doing that, and also getting people to write and to contemplate their own journey with this, which is another really interesting thing to do. So fantastic, yeah. So yeah, but obviously we're busy in the summer because hopefully there will be some more crop circles this summer. Yep. And then all the other stuff will come at the end of the summer. But keep looking at the website because that's where everything will be. Okay, so I'll put some links on the on the description below this podcast. Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Yeah. Karen, thanks so much for joining me. It's been great. Thanks, Gary. We'll speak again soon. Yeah. Cheers. Bye. Thank you.